Hey there, welcome to the Cafe Genius Impresarios podcast, episode number 20, The Axis of Innovation. I'm your host, Dan Hugo. We have no guest today. I would love to have a guest to talk about this, although I suspect we will have multiple guests to talk about this if I can find some. The type of guest I would be looking for would be someone proactively involved in the development of our innovation hub, the dream for the Southern Nevada, the greater Vegas entrepreneurial ecosystem. So that's what we'll kick off today, my own personal views based on my background and experience. It will be heavily editorialized, but it will also be based on, again, some actual experience and an actual interest in making an innovation hub here, because not everything, I know this is crazy, not everything is Silicon Valley. And in fact, it would be a ridiculous error to emulate Silicon Valley. Let's try to be a better Vegas. I've been saying that quite a bit. Let's do it. So the Axis powers from, let's jump right in. The Axis powers is what I'm referring to. If you're a history buff, you'll know my my little joke there. But so it's the Axis of Innovation is either a reference to that, or maybe like the planetary axis around which the Earth. It is the axis around which the innovation hub might rotate. I will posit that it is both. Go figure that one out. So the first thing I want to start with is a story. It's the best way to start a solo episode, I think. So I used to live in Phoenix. I lived in Phoenix from, I think I was 6. I was just turning 6 years old or something, or yeah, 7 maybe. I was in first grade, so I was turning 7. So I moved, my family and I didn't move by myself, moved to Phoenix, and I had lived there until I turned 18. I went to Harvey Mudd College in Southern California. And then, for some reason that still escapes me to this day, in June of 2001, I moved back to Phoenix. Silicon Valley was wearing a bit thin. Like I said, we should not try to be Silicon Valley. I was in Silicon Valley from 1993, when things arguably became pretty interesting. It's when venture capital really started to take off. That's the part of Silicon Valley most people think of. They fail to imagine the history part, which I'll probably touch on here a little bit. But that's the important part. The downhill slide, I would argue, started in 1993. But we're getting off track. So I moved to Silicon Valley in 93, moved away in 2001. While I was in Phoenix, and of course it was 9/11 came soon after. So the economy got a little wacky, wonky, crazy. So I was talking quite a bit because I figured I would do some remote work back when remote work was not so controversial. But with the economy tanking and with travel becoming a bit difficult and pricey, turned inward, looked around Phoenix, and I tried to find the entrepreneurial bent of the Phoenix area. Phoenix is an old school city. It's been around slightly longer. Arizona became a state in, I want to say 1912. So it's been around for a while. I think Las Vegas became a city or a camp or something in the 30s. I don't know exactly when no, 1864. That's right, 1864. I think that's when Nevada. Anyway, I should prepare more for this history lesson. But anyway, so Phoenix, though, was much more of an old school. In fact, I will say explicitly, because I do know this part, their main non-tourism economic sort of anchors were electronics assembly. So you had Arrow, Hamilton Hallmark, Arrow. Those companies have done some shuffling over the years, but Hamilton Hallmark and Arrow and some others. You had Semiconductors. This was again some ancient history. So you had Motorola, you had Intel, you had Microchip. I think is still around, but Microchip was there. Some others. So Semiconductors, big thing. Government contracting. Hughes, McDonnell Douglas. Boeing probably had some stuff. So people or companies that were building probably defense contracting, you could say. So government contract companies, some large scale stuff. So these were the big players. And of course, like I said, tourism, golf, anything that uses water with reckless abandon. So resorts and hotels and events. I think they had not just, but the Diamondbacks. I think maybe it was their first year. The Diamondbacks right around then got on the World Series with the Yankees. That was a little touch and go. I met George Steinbrenner and Billy Martin when I was a kid. That's how how much of a Yankee fan my family was collectively. Interesting time, especially that final game, but that's for another. I'm not a baseball fan, by the way. Just I watch a good game now and then. But anyway, so the interesting thing was when at that time, Phoenix, somewhere between 2001 and 2005, probably in the middle, they decided to do something interesting. They wanted to diversify their economy. So they took people from these three verticals, again, electronics assembly, semiconductors, government contracting. They sent them on a world tour. They visited other cities. They visited other countries. They came back, and this may sound insane. I don't know how they came up with this crazy, all together. Like, I don't know how they agreed so quickly, but they decided that the future of the Phoenix and general, central Arizona economy was going to be electronics assembly, semiconductors, and government contracting. I know. Crazy. What they did not account for was the fact that genomics, what's the name of that company? It's starts with an I. I can't remember. IG. Genetics was becoming a thing. And so almost at the same time as if like Khrushchev's message, the two messages, the one message that said, we're sticking with electronics assembly, that was the second one. The first one was, hey, maybe we should look at biotech and maybe some internet companies and think outside the box. But the second one was the one where the adults in the room are like, no, don't be crazy. We're sticking with what we got. The one where all the people with the money are going to continue getting the money. So the first one, if you don't know what the Khrushchev reference is, at least I do have that history right. So this was around the Cuban Missile Crisis. So the big thing would be, do we stick with the old time big money, or do we look to the future? And luckily, Phoenix, for their sake, said, oh, let's look at the future. So they became, kind of a nice epicenter for some genomics research, some other biotech. In so doing, they rolled out lab tech and similar programs at the Maricopa County Community College infrastructure, I guess. There's multiple community colleges, right? So they had suddenly biotech lab technician programs and related. I don't know if there was is gene counting a thing? I don't know. So they had these programs rolled out at the community college and AA degree level. And then you had ASU was already a strong, well-attended public college. So they added some biotech there. U of A already had a medical school. Northern Arizona University already had its pre-med and biotech programs in place. So essentially the whole state was put on a path in a somewhat coordinated fashion towards a biotech component of their economy. That seems to have gone okay. So good for them. The other thing, like I said, the internet companies. So Phoenix became, from what I understand, a nice place to send, I think, Apple and Google and probably Amazon at this point. But companies started opening satellite offices for tech support and other customer-facing services and whatnot. And from what I understand, those are doing pretty well. I haven't really delved into the Phoenix ecosystem just because I haven't been a part of it for so long. Maybe I should. So it is right to the south of us. Probably not that it's identical, but probably an interesting place to look as opposed to places like Silicon Valley and Research Triangle in North Carolina and UT Austin, for example. Austin with UT Austin. So the big places where people look first when they're like, hey, we should be just like them. They will often look at places that have schools that are highly productive when it comes to talent development, skills development, future looking. Obviously Silicon Valley started, by the way, if you don't know this, Silicon Valley started as an orchards, heavy agricultural area. And it kind of took off when the military moved there. Lockheed, there's a company right in Sunnyvale that was making Polaris missile tubes for the submarines to launch ICBMs. I guess so. So launching nuclear weapons, right? So because of the placement of the South Bay at the tip of the bay there, it somehow became a Navy hangout. So port of call, Liberty cities and all that stuff. Interesting times. That was from when I lived there. I heard all kinds of historical tales. But the important part was the professor, I think it's Turnen, who was a major force in the development of radar during World War II. That doesn't really make a big splash when you look at the historical. Everybody's looking at, and not to detract from this in the slightest, but they're looking at the D-Day and paratroopers and bombing and stuff. But behind the scenes, radar and code breaking and all the nerdy stuff, non-trivial contributions to the overall war effort. So Professor Chernin, I think I'm saying that right. I keep looking it up to make sure, and I think that's correct. If it's not, I'll look it up again. Moved from, I think he was at MIT, and he moved to Silicon Valley, and he took up a position at, it wasn't Silicon Valley yet, by the way. He moved to the Bay Area, and he took a job as an engineering prof, I think, at Stanford, and then eventually rose to some department head or department chair or something. I mean, it's a fascinating story, and it's much longer than this podcast will be to go through exactly how this unfolded. But the take home is that Stanford was the hub, literally, of what would become really Silicon Valley, not just by name, but this professor convinced Shockley to move to live near his mom and start Shockley Semiconductor, which, once you're a Nobel Prize winning physicist, you get to pick, I guess, which building you're going to start your physics bending semiconductor company in. And he hired the likes of the Traders 8. They would go on to Fairchild and then break away and form companies like Intel and others. And so this was starting in the 50s. So from the 50s to the Intel launched the 4004 in 1971. I remember that because that's when I also launched. But the 4004 was in a 4-bit microprocessor that was first found in Japanese calculators. It was launched in 1971. So from 50s to 70s, actually Silicon Valley. So kind of interesting. That's where a culture of innovation can develop, right, over time, because you still had orchards. There's a friend of mine who was employee number 104 at Apple Computer. This was before 1984. He was very early. And so he was working with Woz in the lab and all the early guys on the Apple II, 2 Plus, 2E, probably the Apple III, even something crazy like that. And he said something funny because I moved to Silicon Valley in 1993, and I was seeing Silicon Valley from that perspective, and I didn't look up the history of. I just said, oh yes, Silicon Valley, it's computer companies. It's a lot of Sun Microsystems was down the street, Apple was down the other street, WeTech, Spark, obviously x86, Motorola, IBM. There were actual processors, flash memory. You could manufacture things. There was some minor chip fabrication going on. It was actually Silicon Valley when I first got there. So between the 70s and the 90s, still Silicon Valley. But then somebody decided to start dumping capital into startup ideas. Whoever thought, screw hardware, let's start doing software, which is reasonable because hardware is hard. But so the Silicon Valley you think of today is based on software. It's based on laptop startups. You can boot up in a coffee shop and get a few $1 billion and break things, move fast and break things, as some idiot might say. So that's Silicon Valley. And I got there from Phoenix, but the take home is like there are certain notions about a locality, and you sort of have to consider who's there and direction and culture and foundational elements like that. So access to education and talent is critical. Silicon Valley had, even to this day, there are still, Berkeley, Stanford, even smaller schools like University of Santa Clara. There's the public schools like San Jose State, San Francisco State. There's the Southern California school system. So I went to Harvey Mudd. I moved up to Silicon Valley in 93. So, and not to mention the vast array of higher learning educational institutions and research centers and people from around the world who eventually find themselves or found themselves in Silicon Valley. So there's a whole track that you could get on to get involved in innovation. And at some point there was so much job opening chaos that anyone could get a job, and they would hire you first and then figure it out later if you actually knew what you were doing. And there were certainly people who did not at Facebook. So even Research Triangle, you have Duke, University of North Carolina. And I know my friend my friend from college is a research professor there. He's PhD, of course, does he was, I haven't talked to him lately, he was doing research on reactive armor for the Army, for tanks, and maybe for people. But so there's a certain presence of the military there. That's important. That's where the money comes from initially. Austin has UT Austin and various other colleges around the state of Texas. So UT Austin, though, very strong in tech and innovation. And the list goes on. I'm not going to bore you with college stats, but the fact is that these innovation hubs in cities that are known for this, they have a base of education and talent pool, or they attract people. That's why the cost of living in these places starts going up. But they attract people with these skill sets, and you sort of have to be innovative and even entrepreneurial. Even if you're going to you have to be entrepreneurial. If you're going to take a job at a company that's fast moving, you have to be able to sort of pivot, have some moves. You have to be able to take on the challenges as they come at you. And so entrepreneurial or entrepreneurial bent and innovative nature, you really will succeed much more fruitfully if you have an innovation bone in your body. Maybe 200 or more would be helpful. So if you don't, maybe not so much. So Las Vegas is an innovation hub. So that's the point of this. So I've given you my preamble. There's some editorializing as usual. I'm full of opinions. Trust me. So our future is an innovation hub. What's going to happen here? So Vegas is a destination city. These are my opinions, by the way. A destination city. It is world renowned. It's one of the top 5 brands of city. I'm going to assume that New York is up there. San Francisco is probably up there. I don't know about top 5. Like, is it higher than Rome? Not sure. Is it higher than Dublin? Shouldn't be. But, it's definitely up there. So certainly in the U.S., probably in the top 5, top 3 even. Who knows? Depends on the day. But it's a place where people go. There's no doubt about that. So is it a place, when you say Silicon Valley, people assume certain things. They may be wrong, but they assume certain things. There's a lot of money. It's very expensive to live there. There's a lot of people with money to spend on living there. That's where the technology comes from. That's where Apple and Google do their thing. So their phone is probably associated with Silicon Valley and so on. So when you go to North Carolina, you may be thinking about the Tar Heels, but certainly Research Triangle is an example there. Austin is coming on strong. So that's where a lot of companies have moved. There was always the Nerd Bird that connected Austin and Silicon Valley. Obviously, the Portland area and so Washington and Oregon in general, you got Amazon, you got Intel, you got Nike, got a ton of companies. So there are these epicenters of high profile, we'll say product development. They're certainly tech related. Even Nike's got tech. And not everything is software, by the way. I mean, tech comes in many forms. Sometimes it's hardware, sometimes it's material science, manufacturing. There's all kinds of stuff. So yeah, Vegas is a destination city, mostly associated with tourism. I have to say, when I worked with Intel Corporation, I would travel around the world working with innovators of all ages and points of origin. So I've seen firsthand the culture of innovation is when people want to think outside their own limitations. They want their reach to exceed their grasp, so to speak. So given an opportunity, they want to try out the latest maker hardware. They want to try out some ideas with some friends. I always tell the story of the kid who made the drone controlled by a ukulele, so he could make it do flips and whatnot with his strumming away. It was kind of funny. I mean, it was for fun, right? It was not practical, but that's where a culture of innovation gets you, is people who want to just try things. They have a thirst for implementation of their ideas. They're like, oh, I've always wanted to design a drone controlled by my ukulele, so why not? And there he did it. So, and by the way, hackathons, this was at a hackathon, Penn Apps in Pennsylvania, another place with some innovation. People showed up, 1,200 to 1,500 people would show up there twice a year. And they would either come with a team or they would come there by themselves and work with others. It's not only a place of personal innovation, sort of, like I said, thinking outside your own limitations and day-to-day work and whatnot, but it's also, you've never seen a group of competitors, in case where there were like competition for prizes, competitors that are more helpful. So you could find, I need a soldering iron. I need some help debugging this. I need help. Can you hold this while I, all manner of collaboration. And that's where a lot of innovation happens, is in the intersection of ideas and collaboration and cooperation. So the fact that these environments where I ended up seeing frequently multiple weekends in a row, I came up with a total, which is maybe short, but 47 hackathons that I participated in as a mentor and or co-organizer. So Intel events or events that we were sponsoring or participating in. And it was, it was always educational for me, even though I was there to help people with our Intel products and the Edison especially. So I had time in the lab, and then I would go out in the field and work with our customers. So you could really see, like, sitting next to people or them coming to find you, like, how do I make this work? And you get them through, like, well, what are you working on? And the ability to take the parts and pieces that were provided, whether it was the Edison itself, or maybe somebody had Raspberry Pi or an Uno, or, who knows? There was a variety of toys. And then you throw, BeagleBone, by the way, also player at the time. So you got your Beagle boards, you got your BeagleBones, I should say, the Uno, the Leonardo, maybe a Mega, maybe you got your Edison, maybe you had an old Galileo board. We were bringing those out too. Maybe you had who knows what you had. So all these people would have these ideas, and I wasn't just helping people with Intel products. That'd be ridiculous. So many choice, and then not to mention sensors and the Grove stuff from Seed enabled people to just plug and play, right? So you don't have to be a soldering master, right? No soldering required. This is all about, I have 48 hours. I want to try out some ideas. I'm not going to be soldering and desoldering and inhaling flux and all that. So these were events built for innovation and implementation, right? Well, ideation too, right? Sometimes you just get there and you come up with something. So our Future Innovation Hub, I believe that's what people envision. I think the people that are envisioning that, I don't know for a fact, but I have this burning sort of question. Have they ever been a part of we'll call it an ideation sprint? Not everybody likes the word hackathon. Have they ever been a part of I'm going to stay awake for 2 days and work with people, sometimes people I just met, and we got some dry erase markers and a dry erase board, and we have an Uno and some jumper wires and a temperature sensor and you got a whole, the Grove starter kit, for example, or the Uno, the Arduino kit starter sensors and whatnot. I got a handful of sensors. I got some wires and I got some breadboard maybe. Let's see what we can do with this. And I have actually, when you actually do that, I've done that in a workplace, and I've also done it at hackathons. It's really fun because you sort of, like, you don't know exactly where you want to go. You're not exactly sure how you're going to get there. You go, and by the way, MIT used to have, they used to call it the box of parts competition, which I think we should probably bring back here in Vegas. The box of parts. So you'd be on a team and you'd get a box of parts. So everybody would start with the same box of parts, and then they would have to build a thing. And today you see robot competitions like First and Vex. So it's almost like, for them, it's more like a Formula One race or something. Like you kind of have to follow this, set of rules about, car height and tires and fuel and whatever, all the parameters, but you have a lot of leeway. Here, the box of parts was, it'd be like building a car out of exactly the same parts, right? So almost like NASCAR, like almost like you're all starting out with the same thing, to make some racing analogies. So the box of parts enabled the creativity to shine and the innovation to shine from a team of people. And the one that I saw when I was young, I think I was probably about 10 years old. I saw it on 60 Minutes. Yeah, I watched 60 Minutes when I was 10. You can send me an email if you have trouble with that. But the goal was to take, there was like a square hole in the middle of the table, like a little pit. And the goal was to move a disc, I think it was, into the square opening. So not quite it wasn't, it was literally putting a round peg into a square hole, but so there was clearance. I didn't have to fit directly into the round, so there was space to get, 90% on target, and you'd get it in and you'd win. So the idea was you had to get your disc into the hole in the center of the table before the other team on the other side of the table. And so all manner of strategies and all manner of like defensive tactics and I have looked, by the way, I've asked people at the Media Lab at MIT, do you remember the box? And they're like, no, they're too young. They don't remember. But the ones I remember, one team had a projectile that would attempt to knock out the other team's disc, like push it out of the way, and so like the moment they said go, they would fire this projectile. It looked like a dustpan or like I don't know, like a big 2-prong fork, and it would just launch. So it kind of stayed on the table and flew at the other team. The goal was to have the tines of the fork, if you can picture that, catch the disc and move it off the table. So just knock it out, and then they'd be out. Then you'd have, so then their strategy to move the disc into the hole could be much slower. Their presumption was they've removed the opposition completely. They're off the board, literally, and then take their time getting the disc lined up and into the hole in the center. Others were like these sweeping arms that would knock things across the table. I think one of them was, it had if you can imagine your arm. So the elbow would be sort of on this side of where the hole was, and the forearm would be swinging across the table to get in front of the hole to block it, the center hole. And then the disc would be somehow connected to the forearm part. So it'd be kind of moving it into position while blocking. So stuff like that. It was interesting. And again, the take home was that you ended up having same box of parts. So it came down to the innovation, not the budget, not the, time available and things. So this was a starting point. It was always the same. The rules were very simple. The goal, even simpler, really. It was fascinating to me. So I've always been fascinated by that. So where's our innovation headed? In that case, it was obviously a game, and the goal was set, but the innovation was enabled by testing real innovation with the same box parts. In the real world, I would not say that is wise. There's something to be said for example, processor variety, or like, for example, when nowadays, modern cell phones, the innovation comes from where? It comes from the camera. That's it. It comes from the camera. So the displays are pretty much the same. You're going to go 90 hertz, 120 hertz. Maybe you're going different AMOLED or different display technologies, but they're all mostly, it's really difficult to see or to feel, which level of Gorilla Glass and how far can I drop the phone and how many times before it dies. So the camera is the thing that people notice first. It's the thing that shines. You got your computed photography from Google. You got your strong actual cameras from Apple. You have Samsung doing their thing. Maybe they oversaturate and Google has better low light, whatever. They're differentiating on these camera features because the phone itself is pretty much the same. You've pretty much reached box of parts status, right? So everything's using similar technologies. You got the same radios. You're not going to go really on performance. Do you use the Xanos or whatever it is, Exynos, whatever it is, Samsung ARM part? So what do you have to do? You have to introduce differentiation. So you have to do things like battery power management, battery chemistry technology adjustments, and how much is the phone going to weigh? So it's really getting to these smaller points. So the room for innovation in the cell phone arena is sort of like the box of parts, like I said. So you now are like, okay, how do we take these same parts that everybody knows and make them better, competitive, knock the other players off the table so that you get the whole market? Software is a key. You're either iPhone or Android, right? So that's all you got. Nothing like a little bit of choice. So every once in a while, then you have some new components thrown in the box, right? RISC-V, the TPU stuff from Google, the new M2, I guess, from Apple. The A, I guess it's the AA parts for their mobile. M2 in their laptops, but the A2. So Apple now has a unified instruction set at long last. Their devices. And then, by the way, I was at Apple for the PowerPC switch. So 68K to PowerPC. What a crazy time that was. Talk about innovation. Like, we're just going to switch the fundamental architecture that everybody uses without anybody noticing. And they almost within reason, they pulled it off, which is kind of amazing. So even though Apple's collectively I'll just say a problem, in my opinion, they have done more crazy things. And I mean, like 68K to PowerPC to Intel to ARM, and they're making their own ARM parts. It's crazy. I also worked there in the Newton time. So I was there for the MessagePad 2000. So that was some innovative times. They were actually doing, even though, again, I'm not a fan of Apple. I used to be, but I think they're too draconian now. But that was the time of innovation. So back then it was like, we got a ton of parts. We got multiple boxes of multiple parts. And we can do just about anything. And nobody has any expectations. And if you look at Nokia's phones, their gamer phones and the weird key layouts and all that stuff. Just crazy. So once you settle into like, well, this is what we're doing, then you end up with innovation happening in a very small opportunity. So something to think about. But anyway, so where are we headed? From what I understand, there's a group of people, there's some government money, there's some federal government money available to develop some economic diversity, and Southern Nevada would like to become an innovation hub. And so there's some people that are looking at a grant proposal for the federal government. And I have heard, now, first of all, I am not invited to this meeting, so because I do not know anything about innovation. But from what I've heard, they're looking at making a machine learning hub, maybe. Not sure. It's rumor. But I would say I'm gonna assume that's correct. But I'm gonna say that even if it's not machine learning, if it's we are going to be an innovation hub of, and then the blank is being filled in, I would say that is wrong. That's a bad idea. It would be like saying we are only going to be innovating in moving pucks into the center holes of tables with this box of parts. Go. Right. So you're basically setting yourself for limited innovation before you even get started. There's something to be said for, I always say, oh, it is similar to a box of parts. But if you don't have a goal, if you don't say we're moving this peg into the hole in the middle of the table, the disc, whatever, if you say build something with this box of parts. And so I described earlier the hackathons were sort of similar. You got to put your own parts in the box. So you might grab an Uno, you might grab an Edison, you might grab some O2 sensors, you might grab a Wi-Fi or a sound. I think he used a audio pickup on his ukulele, but either way, you would go plucking some pieces and parts from different vendors who were sponsoring the event, or if it was an Intel IoT hackathon, there were ridiculous amounts of different kinds of sensors, like jumper wires and breadboards and Intel parts, and you could go to town. And so it wasn't here, do this. It was here, use these and do whatever you want. So I would say, if somebody asked me, and they haven't, if I was going to build an innovation hub here, well, let's do that. So the first thing to do is to create a culture of innovation. So that's going to take a while. There needs to be people wandering around on the street, looking at things that don't work and thinking that they could make them work. And those people need to take time on the weekend or whenever to gather at events that are fun, but also enabling. We've had these here in Vegas, by the way. The County of Clark sponsored a Smart City Hackathon, I want to say 2017, 2016. We had a mini maker fair here in 2017. Crazy enough, there was an AT&T sponsored hackathon with Local Motors driving that ridiculous, I can't remember, some goofy vehicle up into the where were we? We were at the Cosmopolitan. There was a big giant hackathon. And Palolu won, by the way. And there was an LV Bots meetup at Palolu near the airport on Pilot Road, very near the View Studio. I think Palolu is still in business even, but very, very quiet. So there were occasional robot-oriented hackathons. There was the Take It Back-a-thon to get away from commercialism and get back to just hanging out and trying projects out. So there used to be a small, we'll say a nascent culture of innovation briefly. But that was, I'm going to say, a lot of people from not around here. So I would say it was not local innovators. It was more people who came here to be innovative. And what drove some of that? Well, the Polo is a company that's here. So they were local. They still are. But Downtown Project drew people from far and wide. The Take It Back-a-thon was run by someone who, I believe she was from Australia. And she came here possibly indirectly to try some things. And she's moved on to, she's worked at Microsoft and other companies doing a lot of embedded and hardware hands-on stuff. So, she got here and brought innovation culture with her. There were other people doing the same. So there were hackathons, there were smaller events. There was much more of a bent towards trying things. The Sin Shop, SYN, Sin Shop was downtown. It has since moved kind of off the beaten path in Henderson. AWS, Amazon Web Services, they would have their reInvent, which they still do. And Intel was one of the participants in one of their hackathons. So there was a room full of people. I want to say like 200 people who were there for the reInvent conference, but they took the weekend ahead of it and had a 2-day hackathon, like try out some Intel stuff. And, obviously you're using web services. So you're connecting to Kinesis and you're hacking away on some sensor data to push it up into the cloud and then do stuff with it and maybe pull it back down and make an LED blink, or who knows, could be anything. Amazon, by the way, had some. There was the Amazon Loft in San Francisco. I think they had one in New York. I don't know if they still do. The one in San Francisco, I think, recently closed. I had been there many times. Very cool spot. Go and hack on stuff, and you could talk to Amazon people, and they could answer your questions about using AWS for your real world project. When I was at the Loft in New York, I did that. I actually said, "Hey, I want to do this thing with AWS," and they answered my questions right there. Totally cool. So if you're going to have an innovation hub, you need to have that sort of person walking around or rolling around. There's no limitations on ambulation, but people who are curious, intellectually curious, and want to actually act on that. And then those people have to have a place to go, or people to collaborate with, or a library card or something. They need to be empowered. There's at the Media Lab, there's one of the co-founders of Arduino had a Lego lab. I met him. I was like, this is amazing. Like a whole Media Lab at MIT, and the Media Lab focus on Legos, right? So how do you enable people to take a box of parts, in this case Legos, and turn them into things, right? So if you connect a STEAM education and properly seeded interests and empower those with curiosity fueling pieces and parts, and maybe some mentorship, some people that will help out. We have the Sin Shop, like I said, but in San Francisco there was the Tech Shop, which was a subscription makerspace. There's here in Vegas, we do have makerspace at the Becker Tech Center. We have a very teeny tiny makerspace at UNLV in Blackfire Center. There's I believe a different makerspace on the UNLV campus proper. I unfortunately have been to the Fab Lab at Bits and Atoms at MIT, which is where Fab Lab was invented. That's sort of the makerspace concept from Neil Gershenfeld. His goal with as the Fab Lab concept evolves is to have a Fab Lab be able to make a Fab Lab. You should be able to construct all the parts that go into a Fab Lab in a Fab Lab, so they become self-reproducing. So now you have a Fab Lab in anywhere, and then there's another Fab Lab nearby as a result of that first Fab Lab, and so on. That's innovation. And the Fab Lab is not a Fab Lab of product. It is a Fab Lab of implementation. It's where you take an idea and you make it, build it, you realize it. So our innovation hub should be a wealth of resources and intellectually curious and possibly even talented people that are bored. That's crazy, isn't it? People that are not doom scrolling and TikToking and who knows what else people are doing nowadays, but not having things to do that take you from interaction and collaboration and bring you into your own little world looking at a little screen will go a long way. So bored people with curiosity and creativity and the parts and pieces that fit together, or sometimes don't, and maybe even the ability to make those parts and pieces. And not everything is code. I haven't even said anything about programming. Steam, I'm not a big fan of Stream. I think reading and writing hopefully is kind of already there, but if you're a Stream person, sure. And I'm not even sure if science, technology, engineering, art, and math are the right terms, but they make a word, so that's fine. But STEAM is not coding. It's a lot of things, and some things may be more interesting or may fall into the talent strengths or particular proclivities of a particular person, and that person may meet someone else who can do the other things, and maybe they team up and they make a cool thing. Maybe they become professionals and they have a startup around that. Professionals as in they make money doing it. Maybe they become experts and teachers and they teach other people how to do it. Whatever happens, right? But they're not staring at their phones. They're staring at their idea, watching it happen. So to me, that's an innovation culture. It takes a while to form. There's a Chinese proverb about trees. I will adapt it here. The best time to develop an innovation culture is 1,000 years ago. The second best time is now. So yeah, we should be convincing kindergartners here to stop playing with phones and start making phones, so to speak. So speaking of Stream, I'm not downplaying reading. I learned how to read when I was 2. I'm not going to pretend that I learned how to read on my own or at school. I learned how to read from my parents. So thanks, parents. I, I don't know if they were happy that I became very enamored with the encyclopedia set that they bought. I had bookmarks in each book and all kinds of creative. I always wanted to go to the library and all that. So I don't know if that was good. Probably at the time it seemed like annoying, but I think it paid off later. So that intellectual curiosity, though, can be pointed in many directions. And so the other thing that I will point out is you cannot form an innovation hub around a target market or product or service. You cannot, nobody said, hey, Silicon Valley is going to be making chips. It started there, but they didn't say, well, that's it. We're doing only chips. That's the only thing we're doing. And not to say that starting off with a goal is necessarily as limiting as I'm suggesting it might be. However, you cannot possibly take something that is not already a strength and try to make it a strength. And I will make my ecosystem analogy again. You cannot move into a redwood forest and assume it's going to be a savanna by snapping your fingers. So you cannot simply point and click even. So I think if I were building an innovation hub in the greater Vegas area, I would start by we can take an asset map, right? All the spaces and all of the people, the spaces being things like coding boot camps or maker spaces or community centers or libraries or schools with tools and resources and willingness to participate. Obviously, you need some mentorship, teachers. I actually tried to get a Coder Dojo deployment. I don't know, Coder Dojo location here in Vegas after having met Bill Liao as one of the early co-founders of Coder Dojo. That was quite educational when I met him. I tried to get that started here. It was right before the pandemic, so that didn't go well. But the ability for young people who are curious and who have a desire to get them talking, collaborating, interacting, and to enable them with mentorship from people who know stuff and want to share with them. Now, it's tricky because you're not a teacher, so it's not so much trying to motivate. It's really more about answering questions or about seeding the thinking. I'm often presented with people who have some minimal desire, but then don't really know go with it. Not a teacher. I can teach people, but I'm much more, I will say, a mentor. Like, I would rather help push you in the right direction, not have a lesson plan and a curriculum. So that becomes a challenge. And that's a lot to ask of people in general. You cannot possibly take someone who is curious but not motivated to act on that curiosity. If they're being told or waiting to be told what to do, that is a tremendous load. So our culture of innovation requires a certain amount of self-motivation. And that, again, comes from boredom mixed with the ability to access resources that add fuel to the fire of curiosity. So yeah, I would say you cannot possibly pick a direction. You basically have to pick spaces and fill them with parts and pieces and have interested adults or experienced people to help with the younger or less experienced people to point them in the right direction or to answer questions, but not provide answers, if that makes sense. As in, how do I do this is one question, but I have done 90%. How do I get from here to there? Like there's a vast difference between tell me what to do and tell me how to do this. So I know it's subtle, but it makes a big difference. Finally, innovation and entrepreneurialism. By the way, this is a long solo episode, but I have a lot to say on this topic, and I will have vastly more to say over time. Innovation and entrepreneurialism go together like peas and carrots, if you're a fan of Forrest Gump. So you don't have to be both, but certainly if you say entrepreneurialism is not, you don't have to start a business, but you could start a business, then I would say they go together. Like they're almost the same, almost. A lot of overlap. So I believe neither is available in instant form. You cannot sprinkle some rainbow innovation sprinkles or some chocolate entrepreneurial sprinkles. It's called Jimmy's on top of a city and hope for the best, right? So these require I would say you can't even build an innovation culture nor an entrepreneurial culture. I think you have to provide the fertile ground and enable the people who will eventually become the innovators and entrepreneurs. And I just don't see efficient outcomes. You can make someone be an entrepreneur. The innovation part is a little bit harder. I think that's where they don't overlap is anyone given enough capital can start a business. Can they run it and not shut it down? That's a different question. But anybody can be entrepreneurial with the resources at hand. You can argue with that, but I'm being very simplistic here. Anybody can be an entrepreneur. So anybody can start a business. You can start a lemonade stand right now. Can you create your own new product to sell on a sidewalk in the hot weather that's not lemonade? Well, maybe. Can you come up with a brand new product idea to solve a problem that you keep seeing every day, like people overheating on the sidewalk when they're homeless? Can you solve the problem of buses not showing up at bus stops and people that are not fully ambulatory, like in wheelchairs or scooters, rolling out to a bus stop and the bus doesn't show up? Now what do they do? So can you innovate there? You can start a business, but can you innovate? Can you do something creative and solve these problems? And that's the part that I will be curious about as we move forward, whether it's a particular selected focus area or if it's what I would prefer, which is providing an abundance of resources. I always say if you spread out a bunch of Legos on a table, the real innovators and entrepreneurial thinkers are going to start playing with those Legos before anybody says anything. Now, if you tell them, today we're going to be building a Millennium Falcon, some of those people might be less interested. But if you just let them go, you'll probably be amazed at what they come up with. That's been what I've found in my travels. But what do I know about innovation? Thank you for listening. The Axis of Innovation has been a very opinionated piece, but I have, even though I don't know anything about innovation, but I've been doing this for like 30 years, I do have stuff to say. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for listening as always. If you would like to talk about innovation in the greater Vegas entrepreneurial ecosystem or entrepreneurialism, or if you're doing something weird and interesting and it's sort of related to those things, you want to be a guest on my show, you're welcome to it. Have at it. I've had some guests in the past. They've been interesting. It's hard to find people with time lately. I'm hoping to get some people from other places to talk about innovation where they are, or entrepreneurialism, or some people doing some creative things in those realms, building or making things that people will use and how they made their journey, what empowered, enabled, encouraged them to do what they're doing where they are. They don't have to be in Vegas. You can innovate for Vegas, but you don't have to innovate in Vegas, as I'm fond of saying for my other 24-hour-a-day gig at the Innovate for Vegas Foundation. Anyway, thanks for listening. Like I said, my voice has been fighting with me this whole time, so thanks for putting up with that. I know I have been putting up with it as well. So thank you so much. Tell your friends, like, share, subscribe, whatever you do with your podcast client and podcast provider. My voice is going to give up. So am I. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.